Alright guys, my name is Metagoblin and welcome to another episode of Unusual Builds for Classic World of Warcraft. So today we're revisiting the Warlock tank build. Basically, I made a video about this recently. I named it the Immortal tank build, and the build kind of focused around sacrificing the Voidwalker to get the health regeneration. A lot of people left a comment in the video, something on the lines of, you know, Metagoblin, stop being a mug, and you should be using Soul Link instead of sacrificing your Voidwalker, because you can basically get an extra 40% damage reduction with your Soul Link. So that's what this build is focused around. It's focused around basically using Soul Link and the Master Demonologist talent as well to maximise your damage reduction. So let me talk you through the build. I've just basically talked through all the key talents in this build. The first key talent really is Soul Link. Soul Link basically gives you 30% damage reduction because the 30% of all damage taken is split between you and your pet. When you stack this with Master Demonologist, if you look at the Voidwalker part of this talent, reduces physical damage taken by 40%. So obviously that is quite ridiculous. That's 40% damage reduction on melee hits exclusively, then 30% on all of damage. And if we look at our armor stat, I'm stacking 30% damage reduction, you know, on top of all that. So that is a total of 70% damage reduction as a Warlock. And that is pretty ridiculous if you think about it, because that's quite equal, you know, it's on par to what tanks get. And I'm not even in the best gear right now. I am in Ironweave set, which is obviously quite difficult to obtain. The Ironweave set gives me about 8% extra damage reduction, you know, 8%, you know, on the armor stat. But the main reason why my armor is so high is actually because of demon armor. If we remove demon armor, it goes to 25%, so demon armor basically gives you 5% damage reduction. So if you stack these things together, you get a total of 70% damage reduction, which is pretty ridiculous. Other key talents which are noteworthy here are obviously improved health stone, just for 20% extra healing on your health stone, cannot complain with that. I've gone for improved imp here because I think this build is actually quite good with the imp as well. Having the imp active will mean you do more damage. You're going to benefit from the blood pact stamina buff, and also from fire shield for even more extra damage. A little bit of extra stamina from demonic embrace, you cannot complain about this. I have improved Voidwalker to increase the effectiveness of my Voidwalker's taunt, because when you're tanking, basically you're going to be face tanking most of the time with this build, but you can also swap the aggro over to your Voidwalker if you're kind of, you know, going low on health, or you can actually open with your Voidwalker. It's actually easy to take aggro over your Voidwalker rather than your Voidwalker taking aggro over you. So sometimes you can open combat with your Voidwalker attacking a target and basically let him get to about half health, and then you can swap the aggro over to yourself. The build has two tanks, your Voidwalker and yourself, which makes it even ridiculously strong. And you're probably thinking at this point, like, what is this build even for? This build is extremely strong at soloing elites, you know, elites in the open world, elites in dungeons. So the potential here is, well, to be honest, the potential of this build is quite unknown, because you can use this build very easily to solo elites, whether that's farming gold in dungeons or out in the open world. So I can see this build being extremely strong at gold farming. Obviously it's going to have some use in PvP. 70% damage reduction in PvP is going to be very useful. You can have, you know, this build if you're defending certain bases in Arathi Basin or Alterac Valley, that kind of thing. Also probably very useful for dueling as well, you know, dueling against melee enemies. I can also see this build coming in quite useful on the Twin Emperors fight in Anchorage. I briefly mentioned this in my last video, but you don't necessarily have to go for this build when you are becoming, you know, if your job is to become the Warlock tank. The only thing you really need to do is get Soul Link, right? Because with Soul Link, you're a Master Demonologist, well, not my Master Demonologist actually. The only thing you really need is Soul Link to be an effective tank on that fight, because, you know, 30% damage reduction, you cannot complain about. Let me finish, you know, talking about the build. Obviously we got Fel Stamina to just increase the health of the Voidwalker slightly, and we obviously spec into Unholy Power mostly just to get Master Demonologist, but the extra damage on the Voidwalker is quite useful. When it comes to Affliction, you know, I've maxed out Corruption just so I don't have to hardcast it, because you will be face tanking quite a bit, so hardcasting a Corruption is a bit of a pain in the backside. I've got a little bit of improved Drain Life, because you can use, because I've also got Fel Concentration in conjunction with Drain Life, which means you can obviously use pretty good face tanking with this build as well. In my experience, the enemies seem to die before the real need to do face tanking, but nonetheless it's probably going to be a good life saving strategy. I did go for Curse of Weakness here to kind of feel the waters with it, but I just don't feel like it's I just don't think it's as effective as Curse of Agony. Curse of Agony does a ridiculous amount of damage, and you can amplify it with Amplify Curse. So I think the damage is just simply too good to ignore. I think the mitigation you get from Curse of Weakness just isn't worth it, because the damage you lose means that you're going to spend more time in combat killing the enemy. Whereas if Curse of Agony, you're just going to kill the enemy a lot faster. Which is the reason why I would go for improved Curse of Agony instead of Curse of Weakness. That's the only mistake I've really made of this build. And obviously I've got Nightfall as well, because when you're using Drain Life and it's Corruption as well. So if you're using Drain Life and Corruption, you have a very high chance for you to proc Nightfall, which means you can get some cheeky instant Shadow Balls into your rotation, which again just means you're doing a lot more damage. I actually do think that this build has the potential to basically tank dungeons, although I don't have like the resources to test that. This is just kind of like a theory crafting point, but if you look at the Bloodguard's Dread with Hand Grip, or Hand Wraps, gives you a 50% chance to avoid interruption caused while casting Searing Pain. So that's a massive amount of... that's going to be a massive benefit to your Searing Pain hard casting, because a lot of the time you're basically not going to have that caster interrupted by melee hits. And Searing Pain is basically a spell which causes a massive amount of aggro, and if you're spamming Searing Pain in a dungeon, I reckon you can probably get away with tanking a dungeon fairly easily in this build. You know, if you're getting healed up with Drain Life and Searing Pain, I think you can tank, you know, enemies in a dungeon. I think you have the potential to do it. So if you're feeling like, you know, you just want to have a laugh and you don't want to wait around for a warrior tank to farm whatever best in slot gear that you need for your raid, then you might have, you know, it might just be fun to have a little bit mess around with this build and give it a try and, you know, farm some dungeons. So let me show you some gameplay of this build. The enemies I'm about to attack have about the equal stats of what a elite enemy in a dungeon will have, and you're more than capable of holding your own against these enemies. I've even tested against kind of mobs that have equal stats to raid enemies, well, not raid bosses, but obviously the trash before a raid boss. I'm actually able to hold my own against those kind of enemies. Obviously I do die and I can't finish them off, but with a healer I would be able to finish them off, so that's an interesting thing to bear in mind. But nonetheless, let me show you this build. So let me show you some action. The rotation is basically similar to the leveling rotation. You know, you put as much dots up as you can, and then you just kind of face tank the enemy, you know, with your wand. So I'm going to open with Immolate and Curse of Agony, Corruption, and then I'm just going to wand, get my pet to attack. I'm just going to prove to you, like, I'm taking, that was a crit there, but I'm taking 125 damage against elite enemies. I'm absorbing a lot of that as well. If you look at the full open combat text, it's the red combat text appearing on the screen. Sometimes I am getting crit, but yeah, I'm able to, you know, tank this mob fairly well. And you can obviously send your Voidwalker into combat first, so that makes the tanking process even easier. So let me show you. I mean, you can send your Voidwalker in and allow the Voidwalker to take some damage before you decide that you want to pull aggro. Obviously when you're doing your standard rotation you're probably not going to pull aggro, but like I can just chill here and let my Voidwalker basically soak the damage. But if my Voidwalker is getting low, best way to pull aggro is just use Drain Life, and you probably will eventually pull aggro. The suggestion I would make here is making a macro that will basically toggle off your Torment when you decide to Drain Life, because then it'll be easier for you to take aggro off your Voidwalker. Obviously as a Warlock you have a number of utility spells to make the process of tanking even easier. I mean, you can put enemies into a Fear, you can put them into a Horrify, and also get a little bit of healing back. With so many survival spells that the Warlock has, you know, improved Healthstone, which I didn't mention. There's so many different ways that you can survive as a Warlock, so soloing dungeons and elite enemies should be an absolute cakewalk, especially in this build, because I think it's probably easy enough without speccing into this build, to be honest with this. So speccing into this build makes it, you know, even easier. The very last point I wanted to make about this build is basically just quickly talking about Hellfire. So Hellfire is probably one of the strongest AoE abilities in the game, but the downside to that is the fact that you start taking damage. It says here that you take 209 damage, but when you have Soul Link active you actually take a lot less damage. So, and obviously with your enhanced survivability of this build, you're going to overall be taking a lot less damage from the enemies. So there's potential here. As you can see, you know, I'm only taking 153 damage. There's potential for this build to become very good at AoE farming as well. I'm not particularly familiar with AoE farming strategies out there, but I know mages are use a lot of AoE farming strategies to farm money or experience and things like that. So there's potential for the Warlock to become a very strong AoE farmer as well, providing that they use this build. That's pretty much the last thing I can theory craft and rant about this build. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and found it interesting. Maybe I'll make a video soon of me properly tanking a dungeon as a Warlock. That, let me know if you'll find that interesting to watch. But anyway, my name is Metagoblin. Until my next video, ciao.